Hey everybody, welcome back. Well, we have a ton to go over between Bitcoin dropping after hours, MicroStrategy's plummeting, and 3 core earnings, and a huge shift today. But let's get into it before PCE tomorrow morning. This one's going out a little later because I wanted to make sure that I listened to some of these conference calls before I even did this video. There's a lot of moving parts last night, and there's a lot of stuff out there that's not going ideally well, and we're going to talk about it. It's really important. You can obviously see the drop at 5, 6 right around here, right? You just see that plummet. Why? We're going to get to that, and obviously what's going on here, and get ready for PCE tomorrow. But really what we're seeing that huge pop again, and then we're just seeing that kind of drifting, aren't we? Where we're not really getting anywhere. And then, of course, you can just see how this plays out. It's not ideal, guys, at the end of the day, especially on the news. But if we take a look here, what are we really saying? And let's just drop this to an hourly for a second. It's the same level from November, and we're just not really able to get above it. Now, there are some things here that we should just talk about that would make our life a little easier. And what I like to do all the time is just demarcation. Now, by demarcation lines, just areas of interest where it can tell me how we're acting. So the first thing is from that peak VWAP. Peak VWAPs they're really key in understanding like human psychology and where people are at. And we can see how we're acting since then. And the other thing that I really like to do is just drop the anchored so we can see from there, from the volume profile, where people are at and how we're acting. And you can see right here, you're at the top end of the range and you're pushing through that range. That can be good. That can also be bad because it could just mean that if you start to break it, you get back down to the red line, which is point of control. But what we're really doing here is understanding that, are we able from that peak to get over that value high, or do we have a problem? Well, what we're understanding is so far we've bonked on that since that date 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So are we at the high end of the range? Do we have enough juice tomorrow after PCE to get through that? I don't know the answer to that yet, and obviously neither do you, but I do think that this is worth noting. If we flip this, then we could see point of control move up a little higher and then kind of drift from there. And this does look better than the NASDAQ. Take a look. To start with, on the NASDAQ, you can see our peak VWAP. We did get over it. We tested a couple times the break, the retest, and then we're trying to lift. You have a neckline right here, and you completely matumboed that neckline, didn't we? And then from there, the rally, again, you're holding that area. And that's really important, guys. I put peak VWAPs on your futures and just watch, see how it goes. And so watch that 21 level. Now, if we do the same thing that we just did on the ES, this is pretty interesting. What do you see as far as a difference? Point of control is up here versus where the ES is, and we're using the same place where we peaked before. So what is this telling us? It's telling us that the S&P is actually stronger than the NASDAQ and has more demand. You know, one of the things I went over on Saturday's video, and for those that are new, you might want to subscribe because all these videos are linked together. And it's basically like following a story during the week. But one of the key things here is point of control is that's the price that everybody owns the most at, which would be right here. And then what VWAP is volume weighted average. So when you click this, this is the combination of the volume weighted average of that line. But the majority of people own it here. And I think that's a really important distinction. I actually like point of control more than I like VWAP sometimes because once you get up or over or reject, you know that they're going to be vicious areas. And not everybody watches point of control, so it's a little bit more of an edge in my opinion. But again, different strokes, different folks. So you're going to want to get this. Like, why is that happening? Well, you have a bunch of names that are imploding tonight that we're going to get into. They just had some earnings that just no better way to say it. They just weren't great, and we should discuss it. But I think the important thing here is the ES is better than the NQ. So let's start with what we're seeing there and where the money flow is going. Now, the one thing that we know about what's happened so far is we know that financials are going to do well under the current administration. Why? Deregulation and also stabilization with the new Treasury Secretary. Everybody loves this guy. We went over it yesterday. With interest rates. So we know financials are going to be great, supposedly, especially larger names. Now, why is this good for the S&P? Because a large portion of the S&P is financial. And you can see this in the big dogs. So if we look at the JP Morgans of the world, the Goldmans of the world, they're all near highs. So this is important to understand that the deregulation is really going to help them. They're going to be able to go out there and maybe buy some banks again. You can even see KRE here hitting a key level. Now, why is that important? Now, if you remember KRE before, when it finally broke down here, when all the regional banks were supposed to go to zero, we were all going to lose the regional banks and every piece of commercial real estate was going to zero as well. Now you can see, where'd you break out? You broke out the day of what? The election. Why? Deregulation, easing of controls and regulations and restrictions. I don't care how you feel about it. Our job is to make money from it, right? So when we look at this, we can understand that and say, okay, well, maybe they're going to be able to go out there and buy some more banks. Maybe lending restrictions on these regional banks are going to be easier so that these smaller banks can go lend. And that's going to be good for them and they're going to make money. That's the thought process. So when you start to see things like DPST start trading up and you're watching the 12, the 22, and the 55 weekly start to spread again, it starts making sense. But these names obviously are not for the weak of heart because you can move $10, $20 because somebody sneezes. But things like this make a lot of sense. And then you're watching money just flow into the top names. FCNCA, and you just kind of go through them all and you'll just see it. M&T Bank, regionals, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're seeing is that sector's leading, and that's one of the key reasons why the S&P is going to outperform. The other would be the energy sector, and we're seeing energy have lifting. Now, you came down the other day, but energy is a decent part of the S&P. Smaller percentage, obviously, than financials, but where's your energy sector in the NASDAQ? You don't have one. So it's really important to understand that the rotation is going in those names. It's why when we look at IWM and we see that, oh, we're hitting highs and everyone's feeling really good about themselves. Well, why is that? 15.9% of the IWM is financial services, the KRE names, the smaller names. Again, deregulation. Where else does that lead us? Well, that leads us to great names like Progressive. And the one thing I was saying from the beginning, since this all started with the election, the one thing that no one talked about, if you paid attention, see, it's the devil's in the details. It's not also what they say, it's what they don't say. No one complained about insurance prices. No one said, oh, we have to lower insurance prices, which are absolutely insane if you ask anybody about their car insurance lately or life insurance or health insurance. These prices are absolutely insane when you start talking to people about them. And why is that important? Well, that's important because it's bothering people clearly and they need to do something about it. But neither one running for office brought it up. Now you have deregulation in this area so that you're going to see these names continue to push. And they're doing just that. But that also leads to the idea of more mergers and acquisitions, doesn't it? More deregulation, more mergers and acquisitions. A new FTC chair will probably come in. And where else does that lead us? And that's going to lead us into this, capital markets names, which are also hitting highs. Hopefully you can see how this is all connected. I'm actually moving my hands at this time, which you can't see, but I talk with my hands. What I'm going for is all this is connected. So then you would start going through these names, the Apollos of the world, the KKRs of the world, right? You see how it's all getting there? We're all what? Say it with me, connected. And when you get this, you can go, oh, all right. The other flip side of this is the brokers like IBKR. All of a sudden, they're not going to have to worry about huge rate cuts anymore. Therefore, their margin balances are going to go up and they're going to make money off of all of that. Remember, guys, and a lot of people don't remember this with Fed funds, but when you look at the effective rate, people don't remember. Let's just drop this down to a bear chart. People don't remember that they had to pay margin interest. So if you started from COVID on, you never got a margin bill. And then one day you just turn around and someone took $800 or $8,000 out of your account, depending upon your bill. You're like, what's that? Oh, that's the interest on your borrow. And if you didn't trade from here, or you've been trading since '09 or '08, you've been at ZIRP, zero interest rates. You've really only had it for 12 months or 18 months before Powell was like, well, that's not working. And then, of course, you had the pandemic, and you can see what happened from there. So this is probably not going to drop, and we know why, whether we're going to be yay tariffs, boo tariffs, wherever your head is with that. Understand that all of that is connected, and that leads us full circle back to why we're seeing the ES outperform the NASDAQ. And they might be three sectors that you should focus on. Now, let's talk about what happened this evening in the dumpster fire that it was. Now, IGV has been one of the leading sectors, just absolutely ripping, and we're watching names just continue to absolutely rip. But after hours, we had some huge surprises, and quite frankly, some of these were really bad. I'm surprised that some of them actually aren't down more, and we'll get to that in a second. But if you look at Workday, people would look at this on the front of it and go, well, this was pretty good. Once this came out and you started realizing how their margins got to where their margins were, and you realize that there was really no growth here, and then you can kind of see when the conference call started and how that went, not too well. And then you just drop a VWAP from there and you can kind of see where you're at. You're still at the lower end of this range. Whenever you're coming through these things, what I like to do personally, and I find extremely helpful, is I'll just drop a level there on a 50% line and just see, who's in charge of that bar. And if you're under the 50% line, it's safe to say that the sellers are in charge. And if it's above that, it's safe to say that the buyers are in charge. Very simple demarcation line, save you a lot of time, a lot of ag. Why fight the trend? And I know it's not a fib, but it does help. Just gives you an understanding of what you should focus on. This was a disaster, okay? And it didn't get better. And that's the important part of this. None of this got better. So when you gap down tomorrow, you're going to have this weird big island. It's not going to be great, but that's what you're going to have. And that's usually what this thing gives you, something that's not great. Workday is very difficult to trade on earnings, and this was not ideal. Now, that leads us to crowd. And candidly, I see it down $23. I'm shocked that it's not down more. From my perspective, I see the beat, but they guided lower, and you cannot be trading at these valuations and guide lower. So I understand that you're down, and most people say, well, it'll probably bounce. I would listen to the call, and I would try to understand exactly what happened here. I couldn't believe that this was all it dropped after hours. We're pretty aggressive. I should say I'm pretty aggressive after hours in trading these and shorting them or going long them after hours because the moves after hours are so much more liquid than they used to be. But when you started to see this thing move and they started getting to the point where people are diving into it and asking the right questions, you're starting to see some things here when you're really getting in there. And this was bad. There's no other way to say it, but when you really start going through these quarters, they're not great quarters. On the front end, looking at it, you're gonna be like, oh, this is fine. No, there was one bright spot, but it wasn't in the big dog names. And when you're starting to see this, no one's gonna hold this stuff to see if it holds up. They're just gonna get out and then they're gonna look at it later. And that's exactly where we're going with this. So if you look at something like crowd, I would imagine that you're gonna see downgrades on this tomorrow. It's gonna be really hard for me to understand this, and I'll tell you why I feel that way. You've come all the way back up from this event. Now, this event that happened here when all of a sudden it blew up with Delta Airlines and everything got shut down and huge when they put that update out there in the real world and everyone was blaming everybody. And the stock went from 340 to 200, and then you had earnings, and they're like everything was fine. Well, you were already done with earnings from here. You had a week of this in there, right? But the contracts that you were going to lose, well, those contracts are going to be here. Okay, they're going to be further out based upon this debacle, and that's coming home to roost. And I don't know why people weren't getting that, but nonetheless, here we are right now. Now, if you take a look at this, just from looking at where you are, you're going to get below the 12. But where would you stop? Maybe 34, maybe there, maybe the low of this gap, maybe, you're stopping at that close right now. I don't know that that's where you stop. I really don't. I'm going to be really curious to see what they have to say tomorrow on the investment banking front, because this was not good. And I wish I could paint a better picture for you because it'd make my life a little easier to just go long and strong. But you have to trade what actually happens, not what you want to have happen. Again, I was really surprised that it didn't drop right out of bed. And that's the good thing about when you start understanding that leg of the stool. For those that don't know, I'm always preaching the macro side, the fundamental side, and the technical side of trading. Because you really shouldn't be trading without, you just shouldn't. I mean, if you could trade without one part of that, would investment banks be spending millions of dollars a year to have macroeconomics? Would they have fundamental analysis, right? They just wouldn't spend the money. They don't spend it because they want to, they spend it because they need to. And what this does is just make you understand that you need access. Right? However you're going to get it, you need it. But what we're getting here is, again, this tells you what the macro side, you could take Trump and tariffs and deregulation like XLF, who's going to be affected by those moves of deregulation, XLF, and then when do you buy? The technical side. But when you look at this stuff, you're going to have a hard time trying to convince anybody that, oh yeah, the IGV names, yeah, they're strong. Certain names, yeah, sure, they're crushing. Like the Oracles are absolutely crushing, and they have huge demand for product. So if they dip, maybe that's what you look at. But trying to catch these that are going to miss earnings and guide lower, you do not want to play that game. If you were trading down here, maybe, but up here, you don't want to play that game. I speak from experience, 20 years of experience of trying to play that game and catch the falling knife, and you don't want to do it. Now, Dell, this was fascinating to me because a lot of people were like, oh, Dell's going to do great because of SMCI. And the bottom line with this is they should have if they were going to shine. And it's very clear they're not going to shine. Dell laid off 10% of their workforce. And when they do that, it's really a tell. Now, you don't know it's going to be this bad, but understand, if you're growing, employees are a resource. You don't fire or quit a resource. You don't get rid of a resource. You put that resource to different use. For example, when Apple got rid of their car division, which was just an absolute boondoggle, right? Look how great this chart looks, by the way. They took everyone and said, hey, everybody from the car department, we're going to AI. And everybody said, yay, and they went over that way, right? Dell's like, everybody, PCs aren't selling, we're laying you off. They didn't say you're moving to the server division because AI's on fire, all right? And so what's happening is you're seeing that come home to roost. Now, when this call started, and this is always the devil's in the details, and you can just see where this is after hours. And I'm gonna be very clear with you. I'm surprised it's not lower. And I'm really surprised that a lot of these names, and maybe it's because it's thin, and maybe you're looking at these blowups and going, I can't believe he's saying that they should be lower. But this was bad. This was really bad. You missed on the revenue side. You only beat by cost cutting. That's how you beat. And your guidance was disgusting. There's really no other way to say it. You broke down, you rode the line for a little bit, and then you started speaking. And then everybody just like puked your stock, right? This one starts at 4:30, and then they just puked it, and they're still puking it. So I wanted to get through these calls, and I wanted to get through all this information before I did this. I can do a deep dive on this on Saturday, but this is not, from a technology standpoint, what we want on the Qs. This is not really what I want to see as somebody that loves buying tech and trading tech. I felt warm and fuzzy before, and this doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. Now, you have some other drivers, and let's go through one that did exceptionally well, and let's go through our other boondoggle. So I purposely do not run ads on here, and I appreciate you sharing and commenting these videos. Subscribe to the channel. It does help me greatly with the algorithm because I don't run it because of not running ads. Then they don't show it as much for obvious reasons. I don't blame them. MBA. Sorry guys, it's been a long day. Absolutely crushed it. Okay, and super thin name. We'll have huge volume tomorrow. Keep this on your radar. Something else that I want to say, and a trade that I did today, and it didn't work, but I do want to point this out. And I know not everything I do works. The amount of buying that came in on this dip into Amgen, the amount of people that wanted to own Amgen cheaper on this dip, on this blow up of that drug not working is staggering. You had people pouring into this name later in the day. So I know that people love Amgen. They love owning Amgen because it has such a strong base of drugs. Look at this volume, guys. Like, it's through the roof. You really have to go back to some core days here where you're seeing this kind of volume. You're going back to 18, you're going back to 17. Like, that's a lot of volume to come in, guys. Like, a lot. So you might want to watch this tomorrow. You may actually see some kind of gap fill tomorrow. I don't think that that's done. Just kind of a side note, something I'm watching today. I was really surprised by that. And even at the end of the day, it was absolutely, well, I guess we'll use the word shocked, I tell you, because of that volume. But that's actually really good for Lilly while we're on this and going through this, but it was very good for Lilly because they don't have to worry about it anymore. What I'm looking for from Lilly with these kinds of names, should I be looking at them, shouldn't I? I need to start getting above like the 12, the 22, the 55. And I'm just not doing that yet. So until I can do that, I'm just not going to be as interested. The other side of that is NVO, and that's definitely one that I'll be watching, but I'm just not there yet. I don't know why it keeps doing this on the 22, and it's been hiding from me all day and giving me this weird side thing. So we're just going to have to take it as it comes. But again, 22 is right around here. And we got to see if that's going to flip over or not. I don't know why it's giving me this hard time today. Maybe there's some kind of update I need to do. Oh, good. You're going to give me but I want to see how this stuff plays out and kind of go from there. But I think it's good that they don't have the competition. Now, let's just get into this so that we're all on the same page. I have a really good trade here that I want to walk you guys through. I'm not going to do it tonight. We're going to do it on Saturday for time's sake. But if you take a look at Bitcoin and you watch how it's going here, you close below the 12, and that's the first time you've done that. If you start to see how this is playing out, the most important thing you can do when these things start to crack, whether it's an asset or it's a commodity, is just find the peak, which is right here, and just drop a VWAP on those peaks. I can't stress this enough, guys. Your life will get so easy if you do that. And what you do is you just start seeing if it follows the path. So once you can't get above that, you're like, okay, well, we tried and then we failed. And then you're like, okay, well, here's the next day and here, how are we doing? And obviously this is future, so you're trading all the time. But I like looking just from like that 930 level just to get a sense of it. And you start to see these levels and you're like, okay, well, we're pointing down. They're still puking it. They can't get out of their own way. And again, all you're doing is just getting a sense of what they're doing, right? And they're just puking it. Anytime they can get to a level, it's just time to just get out of that trade. And what that tells you is one of the things that we did today was short MSTR. We traded this a lot today, quite frankly, a lot. And we'll walk through it, but on Saturday for time's sake. But what you're doing is you're getting back to that close and then you reject. Tried to rally the close and you reject. It's the first time that you've rejected the close, which means you have net sellers on rallies now. So that means, so you reject the close. Like if you go through this chart, we're not going to do it tonight, but if you went through this chart, you looked at every close since November 5th, every single one you retested and basically went over the open, like from the 5th. Every single one retested the close and went over the 5th, except for today. Every single one did it. It's crazy. And when you start to see those changes in trends, you want to pay attention to it. Now, could someone buy Bitcoin overnight and this open up? Yeah, just watch the previous day close if I could give you anything. One of the biggest tells for us on this trade was just this. And again, I'm going to walk you through it because it's really important you get this concept. I like linking in the education with the information. I do get asked to do more educational videos, and I do plan on doing that. I have somebody helping me with that. But watch this level really carefully. We're going to drop that to a 5 from a 1. And when you start to see this, we'll get rid of the pre and the post. We don't need it. It becomes absolutely glaring, doesn't it, when we use that day? What happens? Bonk, 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 bonk. When you see that, you can't unsee it. And then when you start overlaying that with the other ones, like the other days, it becomes so obvious to you, right? And I think that's really important. You'll start seeing this stuff over again. So once you have a peak and the peak rejects, you start overlaying the other ones in there with it, because they become like weights. Picture you're in the water and someone just keeps handing you weights and it gets heavier and heavier. Eventually, you're going under. And that's exactly what happened here. We'll see if you can hold that 336. If not, 318's on the menu. That is it.